an island where turquoise waves carve into black volcanic rock, where whitewashed houses cling to cliffs like barnacles, and narrow streets wind through the scent of lemon groves and salt. This is Lipari, the largest of Italy's Aeolian islands, a paradise frozen in time. But in 2008, this idyllic postcard shattered, because Lipari has a secret buried in the whispers of its alleyways, in the restless sighs of the Mediterranean, and in the chilling, unsolved fate of a man who came here not to live, but to vanish. Locals still call him Lo Straniero, the stranger. He arrived without a name, without a history, speaking only in calm, fluent English that hung in the air like a riddle. For months, he haunted the island's edges, a specter in a leather jacket, staring at the horizon as if waiting for a ship that would never come. Then, one day, he walked into an abandoned house and became a ghost in every sense of the word. His body was found hanging from a beam, a silent end to a life already shrouded in silence. No ID, no note, just a single, grainy video, the only proof he ever existed. We still don't know who he was, not his name, not his past, not why he chose this remote island to erase himself from the world. Was he a fugitive, a heartbroken exile, or something darker? The truth is out there, lost in Lipari's labyrinth of unanswered questions. And tonight, we're diving into the shadows to piece together the enigma of the stranger of Lipari. Let's go back to November 2008. Lipari's summer crowds had vanished, leaving the island to its quiet winter rhythm, fishermen mending nets, old men playing cards in cafes, the clink of espresso cups echoing in empty squares. And then he appeared, a man who didn't belong to the island's melody. Tall, with a posture that screamed military or man on the run, a leather jacket clung to him like armor. Even as the Mediterranean sun beat down, locals would later say he moved like smoke. Their one moment dissolved the next. He wasn't secretive, just detached. Every Monday, he'd buy oranges, bread, and a bottle of water at the market. Cash only. He'd nod at the vendor but never speak until one day. A tourist asked him for directions. His reply? Flawless. I see English. No accent. No warmth. As if the words were tools, not a language. And when the tourist switched to Italian, he just stared, blank. A man without a country, without a mother tongue. He rented a room above a bakery. The landlord, an elderly widow, would later tell police he gave a name, John, but shrugged when asked for a surname. Why bother, she said. He paid cash, kept to himself. We get wanderers here all the time, but this wasn't some backpacker scribbling in a journal. This was a man who'd sit for hours on the harbor wall, staring at the horizon like he was waiting for a signal, or a reckoning. And here's the thing people noticed. Strangers leave marks. The bartender who served him espresso, he'd stir it 13 times. Every time. The nun who saw him lingering outside the church, he'd touch the holy water font but never enter. Even the stray dogs avoided him. Yet when pressed, no one could describe his face. Unremarkable. They said, average, as if he'd designed himself to be forgotten the moment he stopped breathing. By spring 2009, he'd become part of the island's fabric, a silent figure buying milk at dawn, a shadow pacing the cliffs at dusk. Then, one day, he stopped appearing. No goodbye, no final espresso, just gone. And that's when the whispers began. Did you hear? The foreigner. But by then, it was too late. The stranger had already written his final act. And Lipari? It would spend the next decade unraveling a mystery with no threads left to pull. It was a Tuesday afternoon, March 17th, 2009, the kind of day where the sun feels heavy and the sea hums with restless energy. A local woman, let's call her Sophia, was walking her dog near Lipari's old salt pans. That's when she saw him, the stranger, sitting perfectly still on a rusted bench, his back to the road, staring at the ground like it held the answer to every question he'd ever asked. She'd seen him before. Of course, everyone had. But this time felt different. Later, she'd tell police. It was like the air around him had turned to glass. Like one wrong move and everything would shatter. So she did what any of us might do when faced with the unexplainable. She pulled out her phone and hit record. The footage lasts 47 seconds. Grainy, shaky, the lens half blinded by the glare of the sun. But what it shows is unmistakable. The stranger, sitting hunched in that leather jacket, hands clenched on his knees. His face is gaunt, cheeks hollowed out by shadows. His eyes wide, unblinking, locked on something only he could see. A rock, a crack in the earth, a memory. You can almost hear his silence through the screen. It's not sadness, it's emptiness, a void where a soul should be. And then he moves, just slightly. His head tilts upward, toward the horizon. And for a split second, his lips part, like he's about to speak, to scream, to confess. But the video ends there, frozen on his face, half lit by the sun, half lost to the dark. When Sophia showed the video to her brother, a mechanic with a taste for gossip, it took less than an hour for all of Lipari to see it. By sundown, the island was electric with rumors. At the bar near the docks, fishermen argued over grappa. He's a Russian spy. Look at those cold eyes. At the bakery, old women crossed themselves. A man that empty? The devil sent him. Even the priest weighed in, calling it a warning from God. But the wildest theory came from a teenage boy who swore he'd seen the stranger's face before, on an Interpol poster at the ferry terminal. He's a killer, the kid said, a rich one. That's why nobody's looking for him. But here's what no one said out loud. The video didn't just scare them. It exposed them. For months, they'd dismissed the stranger as a harmless oddity, a tourist who forgot to leave. Now, watching him sit there, rotting from the inside out, it forced them to admit the truth. They'd ignored the signs, the way he'd flinch at loud noises, the way he'd circle the same patch of cliffside every night, as if rehearsing a jump, the way he'd buy a single apple at the market, bite into it once, then toss it into the sea. This wasn't a man. The video whispered. This was a corpse that hadn't finished dying. And then, as quickly as the frenzy began, it ended, because 2 days after the video spread, the stranger stopped appearing. No more oranges at the market. No more dawn walks along the docks. The widow who rented him his room found the door unlocked, the bed neatly made, a half-empty bottle of water on the nightstand, a single leather boot by the window. No note, no suitcase, just a faint imprint on the mattress, as if he'd dissolved into the air. The police came. Of course, they scanned the room for fingerprints, but the surfaces had been wiped clean. They tracked down Sophia's video, enhanced it, ran the stranger's face through every database in Europe. Nothing. No matches. No missing persons reports. No John Does with his description. It was as if the video had conjured him out of thin air, and the island, guilty and afraid, willed him back into nothing. But here's the thing about fire. It leaves scars. Years later, that footage still haunts Lipari. You won't find it online. The authorities scrubbed it, fearing tourism would dry up. But if you sit at the right cafe, buy the right local a drink, they'll pull out their phone, show you a blurry, pixelated ghost, and they'll say the same thing. Every time. Look at his eyes. However he died, he'd been dead for years before he got here. Let me take you to April 12th. 2009, spring had come to Lipari. But the air still carried a bite, the kind that seeps into bones. A fisherman named Marco was walking his dog, Bruno, along the island's northern edge, where the cliffs dropped sharply into the sea. Bruno, a scruffy mutt who'd never once disobeyed, suddenly lunged into the underbrush, not barking, not chasing a rabbit, whimpering, dragging Marco toward a crumbling stone house. Its roof sagging, windows boarded shut, a place locals called La Casa del Diavolo, the Devil's House. No one had lived there for decades. No one dared. But Bruno scratched at the door like his life depended on it. And when Marco pushed it open, the smell hit him first. Salt, rot, and something sharper, metallic, human. Inside, Shafts of dusty light cut through cracks in the walls. Marco's flashlight trembled as it swept the room. And then he saw it. A rope. A chair kicked onto its side. And above it, swaying gently in the draft, the stranger, his leather jacket still on, his face pale but peaceful, like he'd finally found the answer to a question no one else could hear. Marco would later say it wasn't the body that haunted him. It was the silence. No flies, no birdsong outside, just the creak of that rope, and Bruno, howling like he'd seen hell itself. When the police arrived, they found nothing. No wallet, no passport, not even a scrap of paper in the pockets. Just a few euros, a house key from God knows where, and a single ticket stub for a ferry that had docked 6 months earlier. The room was spotless. No fingerprints on the chair. No dust disturbed except around the body. It was as if the stranger had materialized in midair. Already dead. The coroner estimated he'd been gone for 2 weeks, which meant he'd died days before Sophia filmed him on that bench. A fact that made even the detectives shudder. They scanned his fingerprints anyway, ran them through Interpol, Europol, every database from Lisbon to Moscow. Nothing. Not a single match. His DNA. No relatives in the system. His face? No hits on missing persons boards. The ferry ticket was traced to a kiosk in Naples, cash paid. No camera footage. The key? It fit nothing on the island. As for the leather jacket? Cheap. Mass-produced. A ghost's uniform. The only clue was his teeth. Perfect. Untouched by cavities, with a single gold crown. The kind of work you'd see in wealthy corners of Europe. But wealth leaves traces. Bank accounts. Photos. Friends. And this man? He was a black hole. The police tried to keep it quiet. But Lipari's too small for secrets. Within hours, crowds gathered outside the devil's house. Teenagers dared each other to touch the door. Old women left candles and rosaries. The mayor gave a speech calling for calm, but his hands shook. Tourists snapped photos until officers strung up tape. And Sophia? She collapsed when she heard. I filmed a dead man. She whispered to her priest. A man who was already gone. The island split in two. Some called it a tragedy, a lonely soul driven to despair. Others swore it was murder. Why no note? They argued. Why that house? Conspiracy theorists claimed the stranger was a VIP in witness protection. Killed to tie up loose ends. A retired detective from Rome insisted the scene was too clean. Suicides leave messes. He said, this was staged, but with no evidence. The case turned cold. By summer, the devil's house was boarded up again. And Lipari pretended to forget. But in quiet moments, when the wind dies and the waves still, you can feel it. The wrongness of it all. Years later, Marco the fisherman still refuses to walk that stretch of cliff. Bruno died in 2012 of old age. They say, though Marco claims the dog never stopped staring at the door of that house. The stranger's body was buried in an unmarked grave on the island's outskirts. No one came to claim him. No one ever will. But sometimes, at night, locals swear they see a shadow in a leather jacket standing by that grave. Not mourning, not angry, just waiting. For what? Answers? Forgiveness? Or maybe for someone. Anyone. To say his name out loud. So here we are, left with a key that opens nothing. A ticket to nowhere. A face that belongs to no one. And the chilling truth that in our world of satellites and surveillance, a man can still vanish so completely. He takes the truth with him. Was he a sinner? A victim? A man who simply lost his way? We'll never know. All we have is the question that echoes through Lipari's cliffs, louder than any storm. Who was he? After the stranger was buried, Lipari did what small towns do best. It talked. Theories bloomed like poisonous flowers. In the cafes, the harbors, the church pews, everyone had an answer, but none of them fit. Let's start with the kindest guess. He was a rich man who lost everything. A CEO who crashed his empire. A banker who burned his fortune. Maybe he fled to Lipari to escape shame. But here's the problem. Wealth leaves trails. Private jets. Offshore accounts. A name in a ledger. And this man? He paid for apples with loose change. He slept in a room with peeling walls. If he was once rich, he'd scrubbed himself clean, down to the bone. Then there's the soldier theory, a veteran haunted by war. Kosovo, Bosnia, Iraq. Maybe he'd seen too much, done too much, and Lipari was his last bunker. But veterans have records, medals, mangled ID tags, and the stranger's body showed no scars, no tattoos, no signs of combat, just smooth, pale skin, like a blank page. The darker guesses, those stuck harder. A criminal, a man who'd erased his past to outrun it. Maybe he was part of the Sicilian mafia, hiding after a betrayal, or a hitman from Marseille, lying low. One bartender swore he'd seen the stranger flinch at the sound of Russian. Not a flinch, he said, a twitch, like he understood it. But Interpol found nothing. No cartel links, no heists, no bodies matching his methods. Just whispers and the cold fact that the best criminals never get caught. Then came the wildest theory, the one that still creeps into Islanders' dreams. He wasn't alone. A waiter claimed he'd seen the stranger talking to a man in a black sedan weeks before he died. Not talking, he clarified. The man was yelling. The stranger just stared. Another local swore a speedboat circled the island the night he vanished. No lights, no engine sound, just a shadow on the water. And the kicker? The day after the stranger's body was found, a woman in a navy blue trench coat visited the police station, asked to see the case file. When they refused, she left a business card blank. But here's where the theories crumble. There's no proof. No sedan, no boat, no trench-coated mystery woman. Just stories spun from fear and what-ifs. Even the police file is a joke, 3 pages thick, full of unknown and no record. The lead detective retired a year later. He told his wife it was the only case that ever followed him home. That man, he wasn't human. He'd say, he was a stain. And then, slowly, the gossip stopped. The cafes went quiet. The widow who rented him his room moved to Sicily. The bartender who counted his espresso stirs closed shop. Even Sophia, the woman who filmed him, stopped going to church. When asked why, she'd just touch her cross and say, "Some doors, once opened, won't shut again." Maybe they realized the truth. The stranger didn't haunt Lipari. Lipari haunted itself. Guilt festered. Why hadn't they asked his name? Offered help? Reported him sooner? The island's priest called it a collective sin. But no one wanted absolution. They wanted to forget. So they buried the rumors. The video. The memory of his hollow eyes. They let the tides wash it all away. But the sea doesn't forget. It knows what happened in that abandoned house. It knows where the stranger came from. And it knows why a man with perfect English, good teeth, and a head full of secrets chose to die on a sun-soaked island where he'd never belong. Maybe that's the real answer. He picked Lipari because it was beautiful, because in a place that stuns the world with its color and light, a shadow can go unnoticed. A ghost can rot in peace. Today, if you ask about the stranger, you'll get 2 reactions. The older locals will shut down, change the subject, pour another drink, pretend not to hear. The younger ones, they'll lean in, eager to retell the story like it's folklore. But their eyes will dart to the cliffs. The sea, the boarded-up devil's house. Because deep down, they know this isn't a campfire tale. It's a warning that in a world where we track every step, every click, every face, someone can still fall through the cracks. And when they do, they take the truth with them. So we're left with this, a key that opens nothing, a grave with no name, a video that shows everything and nothing at all, and the unshakable feeling that the stranger is still out there, not in the ground, but in the silence between waves, in the chill when the sun dips behind the cliffs, in the questions we're too afraid to ask. Because sometimes, mysteries aren't puzzles to solve, they're mirrors, and what stares back isn't always what we want to see. Walk through Lipari today, and you'll see it, tourists laughing over gelato, honeymooners holding hands on sunset cruises, shopkeepers selling volcanic soaps and coral jewelry. The island has moved on, or so it wants you to think. But step away from the cobblestone postcard. Follow the overgrown path to the northern cliffs, and you'll find it, the abandoned house. Its boards are warped now, nails rusted, walls slouching like a drunk against the wind. The police tape is long gone. The candles and rosaries? Washed away by rain. But stand there long enough, and you'll feel it, that pull, like the house is breathing, like the walls still hold the shape of him. Ask the locals, and they'll tell you nothing. Why dwell on the past, they'll say, wiping espresso cups a little too hard. But come back at night, when the last ferry leaves and the island belongs to the ghosts. And you'll hear it, the old widow who runs the guest house muttering about footsteps in empty halls. The fisherman who swears his nets tangle more often near the northern cove. Even the stray cats avoid that house. They hiss at its doorway, fur bristling, as if something lingers there. Not a man, not a memory, a presence. So why does this mystery claw at us? Why can't we let it go? Maybe because the stranger did the one thing we all fear. He erased himself. In a world of Instagram posts and GPS tags, where every sneeze is logged in a database, he vanished. No Facebook profile, no credit cards, no dental records that led anywhere. He's a fossil in the digital age, proof that you can still slip through the cracks. And that terrifies us, because if he could disappear, who's to say we won't? Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe we see ourselves in him, that part of us that wants to scream. Enough, to walk into the sea and never turn back. The stranger didn't just die, he unmade himself. He took his pain, his regrets, his why, and buried them where no algorithm can dig them up. And in doing so, he became a myth, a riddle without an answer, a shadow we chase because we're afraid to face our own. Lipari knows this. That's why it hides the truth behind closed doors and changed subjects. The stranger cracked the island's perfect facade. He reminded them that paradise is just a lie we tell ourselves to sleep at night, that beneath the lemon groves and turquoise waves, there's rot, there's silence, there are men who leave nothing but a question mark hanging from a rope. But here's the thing about questions, they outlive us. Long after the police closed the case, after the grave sank into the earth, people still come, not tourists, pilgrims, men in sunglasses who linger too long at the harbor. Women with trembling hands who leave flowers at the devil's house. None ever speak. None ever stay. Are they relatives? Enemies? Or just strangers chasing their own reflection in the dark? Theories still burn online. Reddit threads dissect Sophia's video frame by frame. Conspiracy forums claim the stranger was a time traveler. A spy. A clone. One TikTok psychic insists his ghost whispers coordinates to buried treasure. But Lipari ignores the noise. It's heard it all before. The truth? The truth is buried in an unmarked grave, wrapped in a silence no camera can penetrate. And maybe that's where it belongs. So we're left with this, a house that won't fall, a video that won't die, and a name that never existed. The stranger of Lipari isn't a mystery to solve. He's a mirror, a dare, a reminder that for all our satellites and search engines, the world is still vast, still dark, still full of corners where even light gives up. So the next time you feel the weight of being known, every like, every comment, every digitized breath, remember him. The man who turned oblivion into art. The man who proved that in the end. We're all just stories, and some stories refuse to end.